This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
I did a video the other day where I was talking about the sort of innovations, or my perceived innovations of the PRS NF53, and I had a chap in the comments who was like, what's innovative about that guitar? And I kind of thought about it a bit, and then he said, well, what about like the Yamaha Pacifica? And then I thought, well, what's innovative about that? So in this video, I kind of wanted to talk about how I think as guitarists, we're quite resistant. Is that the word? Resistant to change. We're kind of, I think, a little bit more backward looking. Sort of wanted to talk a little bit about the timeline of some of this stuff, as I think it's kind of interesting to talk about. And let me know in the comments, are you someone who's more of a, I go for classic designs, or are you, I tend towards some slightly more innovative stuff? What features do you look for? So, the Floyd Rose was invented in 1976, surprisingly enough before the two-point trem, which I think came 10 years later in 1986, is when Fender started using them at least. Locking tuners, 1983 apparently. These things are not really that innovative anymore. So even on this Yamaha Pacifica, which was sort of, for a Yamaha, pushing things forward a little bit. Like, you can see, like, this is slow-moving stuff in some ways. It's got stainless steel frets. I don't know when those were first around. I'll flash that up if I can find it. Things that feel innovative are not really that innovative anymore. Right, 1983, that's 6 years older than me, and I'm old. We're talking like over 40 years ago. Yeah, locking tuners is still sort of a thing that are not on a bunch of guitars, and sort of looked on as a sort of premium feature a little bit, bizarrely. Equally, Floyd Rose being invented before Fender even started using a two-point trem, I think is kind of interesting as well. This guitar had some Neve pickups, or like collaborations with Neve, which were, I think, some people quite like them, some people don't. Next to my actual Lola Dirty Blondes on my K-line Strat, I think these sound maybe a little bit dull even. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments. The other thing that this guitar had going on, you got contours, which, you know, do make a bit of a difference and do end up looking quite stylish. But the other thing was there was a bit of routing under here, which was designed, I think, to enhance resonance, but also is going to do a little bit of weight relief. And then the body is treated with their IRA treatment stuff. This neck join, I guess you might say, is a little bit more modern compared to what I think, like, my favourite guitars are still the kind of classics, like the Strat. Like this was 1954, right? Is where most of this stuff comes from, like the single coils. The 5-point switch is a slightly more recent innovation, but most of the other aspects of this guitar are pretty much just what you'd have got on your standard Strat, more or less. Non-locking tuners, but they do have that vintage slot, which actually works really well. A bone nut, you've only got 21 frets. You know, you're losing out on that 22nd one. This is a Wilkinson trem, so not quite as... there's a few refinements versus an actual vintage trem, which I think are pretty beneficial, like a pushing arm, and Psionic Audio talked about witness point. So, and the other thing that K-Line do is there's a slightly angled neck pocket to avoid things like shimming. I feel much more comfortable on this than I do on a modern style guitar. This has got a 10-inch radius. I think the Pacifica's got a compound radius. Why is that? Is it, I don't know, as I've got older, I'm progressively even pushed towards like the classic designs versus something like an RG or something more innovative like a Strandberg. Something like Fishman Fluence pickups, you know, something that is kind of barely on my radar. Even noiseless pickups, which are a pretty standard, not that old, not that new thing. You know, I think something like the Fender Ultra is like, it's got so many of these points that to me are not really a selling point for a guitar. I think it must be really difficult for guitar manufacturers to try and do something a little bit new that people are going to be interested in, when there's this inherent sort of conflict between like acceptable guitar shapes in some regards, or things that are regarded as likely to do well. I guess there's things like the like Abasi guitars as well, that those seem to blend a couple of things quite nicely. That Novo video I did, where that was like a slightly different to the norm body type, and some people were like, that's really ugly, others really liked it. I think it's really difficult to push the boat out on this sort of stuff, and do guitarists want it? Equally, like in the amp world, a lot of what sells is reissues, and in the pedal world as well, you know, like reissues of a classic Marshall Blues Breaker, things that can get closer to an old fuzz face. Like, it seems there is this idea in our heads that there really was a golden era of creating music gear, and that's, for I think quite a few of us, what we kind of look back towards and go, well, that was when they were building stuff correctly. And I don't know if that's, you know, necessarily the sort of thing that we can really test without having lived through that. So I guess some of you guys that maybe lived through some of these periods of time could say, you know, what did you think of guitars that you were trying in the 60s and 70s? I'd love to know some of you guys' thoughts on this stuff, because it's kind of just interesting to me when you think about, like, if you were speccing a guitar out for maximum profit, or maximum, you know, profit to effort, these things, what would you build? Would you build an S-type guitar and try and keep it classic, or would you go and say, right, I need to modernize, you know, like, does a Fender Avery outsell a Fender Ultra? I'd love to know some numbers on that. I guess we're never really going to have them, but it's just one of those things, like, do guitarists want innovation? And I think sensible innovation, yes, there is some appetite for, but some of this stuff, you know, just pushing things forward for the sake of it, I think seems to actually be the opposite of what a bunch of us want. You know, like, a lot of us just want Gibson to build the closest thing that they can to a 50s Les Paul, or Fender to build the closest thing they can to a 50s Strat or 50s Tele, and something like a Natocaster, which is, you know, solely aimed at being that thing, seems to be the thing that actually commands quite a lot of attention and quite a lot of money, versus, you know, just someone else doing like a more modern T-style guitar. It just, for me, doesn't get more comfortable than a Strat. It doesn't, it's hard to be beaten in terms of what feels comfortable under my hands, and that's something I can't really fight. What about you?